Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. My name is Marian Guevara, and as you can tell from the title, today is going to be a book plus movie discussion. It's been a while since I've had one of these. So if you're new to this channel, if you just clicked on this video, basically I'm doing this little series where I discuss a book along with its film adaptation. And today we'll be discussing the novel Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor and its film adaptation of the same name, which came out in 1979, directed by John Huston. In the story Wise Blood, we're following our main character, Hazel Motes, who when he was a young boy was very convinced that he was going to follow in his grandfather's footsteps and become a preacher. At the age of 18, he ends up getting drafted in the war, and while he's away, he ends up, doing a complete 180 and becomes a very impassionate atheist. When he returns home, he finds a homestead that is pretty much abandoned, and he decides he's going to trek out on his own and find his own path. And he stumbles upon various different and interesting characters, particularly Asa Hawks and his daughter Sabbath Lily. Asa Hawks is a blind preacher. And in a way to sort of outdo or show off his cynicism, Hazel Motes ends up becoming a preacher himself. However, it is a preacher for the church called the Church Without Christ. And he ends up also meeting a young boy named Enoch Emery, who has something that he calls wise blood. For those who are interested in reading Flannery O'Connor, I wouldn't say that this would be the best place to start with her works. I definitely would suggest that you read her short stories. I feel like that's the best way to get into her work, because frankly, Wise Blood is an odd book. It's really, really weird, and I can definitely see or understand people kind of being turned off after reading it. I mean, especially if you're just unfamiliar with O'Connor's themes in her writing or just her types of characters. For those who don't know, Flannery O'Connor was a religious woman. She was a devout Catholic, and she dealt with a lot of themes like religion and grace. I feel like she's a fascinating author because if you read her story, the first thing that would come into your mind is not, things like grace, redemption, or anything like that. Her stories are often darkly comical with grotesque characters, hardly likable, and violence. If you were to sum up the story of Wise Blood, it is basically about a man who is desperately trying to run away from God, but is unable to do so at the end. So I'll just read a bit from actually the author's note to the second edition. And yeah, Flannery O'Connor explains it quite poignantly. That belief in Christ is to some a matter of life and death has been a stumbling block for readers who would prefer to think it a matter of no great consequence. For them, Hazel Motes' integrity lies in his trying with such vigor to get rid of the ragged figure who moves from tree to tree in the back of his mind. So she's that figure she's speaking of, she's referring to Jesus Christ. For the author, Hazel's integrity lies in his not being able to. Does one's integrity ever lie in what he is not able to do? I think that usually it does, for free will does not mean one will, but many wills conflicting in one man. Freedom cannot be conceived simply. It is a mystery, and one which a novel, even a comic novel, can only be asked to deepen. It's basically there to portray this man who is kind of wrestling with his freedom and the consequences of that freedom and all those conflicting thoughts and feelings and wills going on inside of him. It truly is a layered book, because while I am discussing, themes of religion and God, let it not be forgotten that this is a funny book. There's a lot of scenes in this book that are just, they're just ludicrous. While it's not my favorite O'Connor, after I think it's been almost a week since I read it, I'm still thinking about Wise Blood because there's just such a lot to unpack, and it's humorous and it's entertaining, and yeah, the end result is weird, but it's definitely one that I can explain my thoughts over and over again, but I really feel that you ought to read it. You definitely ought to read it. So now we move on to the film adaptation. So here it is in the Criterion version. This one, in terms of a film adaptation, it's pretty faithful. There are, I think, two major changes, two major differences. One of them is the fact that you see a lot less of Enoch Emery in the film. In the book, there are several chapters devoted to Enoch Emery where we get more of his insight, his perspective, delve more into his thought process, along with, some description about him. The most apparent major difference between the film and the novel is how the two of them more or less explore that greater theme of religion. O'Connor, I think her brilliance lies in the fact that, she's able to balance several things in her works. She's able to balance the grotesque characters. She's able to balance them along with the darkly humor, but then also keep this sort of holy atmosphere, like divine aura within the novel. That sort of thing isn't really present in the film. It became apparent in the filming of this movie. It says here, and actually in the booklet, they actually address this problem. It says, when Dorff wanted to put more nuance into his portrayal of Hazel Motes, Huston informed him correctly that Hazel was a one-note guy. What O'Connor knew and Huston found out was that the one note was God. And in case all of this weren't complicated enough, there is the fact that so much of the power of O'Connor's work derives from her language, its precision, its humor, and down-home eloquence. Basically, yeah, it's gonna be hard to take what O'Connor was able to express in her novel and translate it into a visual medium. And because the film is unable to hold the same solemn aura, what ends up happening is that the humor ends up taking precedence. So when you watch the film, it's easy to say that, this is just a satire on, the evangelical South and on religion. But the thing is, when you read the book, it's something much more than that. So yeah, there's something significant lost in translation between book and movie. That is not to say I didn't like this movie. I enjoyed it very, very much. I definitely would put this in the folder of films where people would ask me, really? You like that? And yeah, I do. Huston does a good job of highlighting truly the ridiculous events that occur in the story. It does a good job of it. However, my favorite part of this film, my favorite part of Wise Blood, is Brad Dourif. Brad Dourif as Hazel Motes is the 8th wonder of the world. There's such an energy to his performance. He's like a firecracker constantly on the verge of exploding. You don't know what's gonna set him off. And he's so lean and tense, but then there's like a lot of energy and power to his frame, and it's great. And he gives a great performance. And the rest of the characters, they did a great job. You have Harry Dean Stanton playing Asa Hawks, and then you have Ned Beatty playing Oni J. Holy. And they all did a fantastic job. Like, there isn't a performance here that is just bad. I think everyone was casted well. It's a humorous film. And it's often described as a black comedy. I would recommend that you do give it a watch. And if you are intrigued with what you saw, don't be a stranger to the novel, because I feel like this is a good way of sort of like dipping your toe into the story. But then when you read the novel, you're gonna find something deeper, find more to mull over. But yeah, I really enjoyed Wise Blood. Definitely a keeper. What I find most fascinating about Wise Blood, particularly the novel, is just how O'Connor portrays two different types of religious attitudes, and how these attitudes are sort of embodied by these characters. You have an apathetic religious attitude, and then you have a fervent religious attitude. As you read the book, you tend to notice that the majority of the cast take a pretty apathetic religious approach. They either view religion as a, get-rich-quick scam. So think of Asa Hawks, Oni J. Holy. They only use religion as a means to turn a profit. And then you have some characters who view religion as something to box in or compartmentalize. So yeah, religion is just an inspiration, or it can be a nice addition to your life to make you feel nice, but keep it separate away from your actual life. That sort of religious attitude. And strangely enough, or ironically enough, it's Hazel Motes and even Enoch Emery who kind of embody the more fervent religious attitude. And this can be odd to say because you read the book and Hazel is just, he's blaspheming, he's preaching the church without Christ, but just look at his actions. He takes a very zealous journey to find the truth. He's always questioning himself, trying to obtain the greatest truth. And for O'Connor, when it comes to religion, it is about seeking truth, about seeking God. You notice that Hazel happens to be very disgusted with hypocrisy. He can't stand it when he sees someone preaching something that he don't really believe, whatever it may be. And yeah, this fervent desire for the truth, this disgust for hypocrisy, these types of things, like these are sort of like traits to, I think, what O'Connor views as a true fervent religious attitude or approach. For O'Connor, religion isn't something akin to comfort food that when you're upset or you need something, that's where you go to, and then once you're placated, you just ignore it. For her, or at least the way that religion is portrayed in her works, it's something that is intense, it is relentless, it is a wellspring from which your thoughts and actions come from. And it's also a driving force that is meant to push you towards some greater purpose, some greater beyond, basically. This idea of religion being a driving force is more or less portrayed through Enoch Emery, because he mentions that he has wise blood. He describes it as his blood sort of singing and thrumming and calling him to do things that he doesn't understand and doesn't even want to do, but he has to do it. And in many respects, that's also how, I guess O'Connor views religion as well. It's also some form of calling that you have to sort of reciprocate, that you're supposed to respond to, in a sense. Towards the end of the book, the very end of the book, where, Hazel's brought back and, he's dead, but she doesn't know, she ends up looking into his face, in particular his eyes. So it's mentioned here, the outline of a skull was plain under his skin, and the deep burned eye sockets seemed to lead into the dark tunnel where he had disappeared. It's like this image of him receding into his eyes, these eyes that are constantly referenced in the book as being able to see far beyond than what is in front of him. And it says here, she leaned closer and closer to his face, looking deep into them, trying to see how she had been cheated or what had cheated her. But she couldn't see anything. She shut her eyes and saw the pinpoint of light, but so far away that she could not hold it steady in her mind. She felt as if she were blocked at the entrance of something. She sat staring with her eyes shut into his eyes, and felt as if she had finally got to the beginning of something she couldn't begin. And she saw him moving farther and farther away, farther and farther into the darkness, until he was the pinpoint of light. This image of Hazel moving farther and farther away as you gaze into his burned out eye sockets. The way I interpret it is that, oftentimes, when you read an O'Connor story, there's mention that the character at the end is able to finally receive grace. And in many respects, I feel like this is the moment that Hazel finally, after the entire book of kind of denying over and over again, has finally done so. He is moving farther and farther away, and as I mentioned, the idea of religion being a force to drive you somewhere beyond our everyday existence, to something greater. That's how I kind of interpret the ending, where Hazel has finally allowed himself to be driven towards that great beyond, towards that something greater. And then if you're Christian, of course, that greater is God. Yes, and that was Wise Blood, both the book and the movie. It is a strange story, and it's definitely, you're gonna find it much stranger if you read the book or you watch the film, and I would recommend both. So yeah, that was another book plus movie discussion. I hope this was an interesting discussion for you guys, and I hope I convinced you more or less to either give the movie a chance or give the book a chance. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next book plus movie review or discussion, and I'll see you next time. Bye!